Now, this is your textbook for the semester. They open like this.
I haven't watched this movie in years, but I knew if I was going to do Dangerous Minds, I definitely had to do High School High. This film doesn't get talked about like the other spoof films, which is wild because the cast was so good. You had Mekhi Phifer, Brian Hooks, who was hilarious in this, Melinda Williams, Guillermo, John Lovitz, such a good group of actors and comedians. There was so much happening in this film. It was hard to choose which scenes to highlight. But with that being said, I noticed some things while watching this film, and you know I have my thoughts. But before we get to that, it's time to recap. So let's get into it. As the movie starts, we meet our main character, Mr. Clark. How ironic. Mr. Clark currently teaches at a private school with strict criteria.
Wellington Academy, are you white? Hold, please. I'll put you right through.
Oh.
Wellington Academy, are you white?
Mr. Clark's father runs this private school, and you would think this would be the perfect, cushy job for him. But no, Mr. Clark is seeking rougher pastures. When his father announces his new position, assistant vice chairman, Mr. Clark announced that he'd gotten a new position at Berry High and would be leaving soon. His father wasn't pleased and declared that Mr. Clark would most certainly fail, but you already know, for some odd reason, he wants to prove his dad wrong. So, we fast forward to Mr. Clark's first day at Marion Berry High. As he enters the side of town the high school resides, child, things get pretty urban pretty fast. As he pulls up to the school, he asks the students where the faculty parked, and they showed him where to go. His car does not make it there in one piece. His tires are popped seconds after entering the lot. Even the steering wheel lock didn't help. These kids jacked him for his car and his briefcase in 2 seconds flat. As Mr. Clark enters the school, he takes in the travesty that is Berry High. Soon after, we meet another one of our main characters, Griff. Griff is the Emilio of this film. You will see what I mean in a few. Mr. Clark can easily tell that Griff has a commanding presence.
Who's that?
What the hell should I know?
Soon after, we meet another character, Paco. I totally forgot he played in this. Paco and Griff are sworn enemies, especially since Griff knows that Paco set him up.
This is my turf now. You show me respect. Me, Paco de la Vega, El Camino Cordova, Jose Cuervo Sanchez Rodriguez. Junior.
Forgetting a name? Skid mark.
Mr. Clark sees this and hops right into savior mode. He breaks up their fight and tries to tell them both how they are so much better than this and they shouldn't be fighting, and he even insists that they shake hands. Needless to say, Griff and Paco were quite puzzled. Tell me why Paco is not even a student at the school. He's just running all through these halls without a care and without anyone escorting him out. Soon after, we meet Principal Doyle, who abuses these students as they head to class. Mr. Clark tries to stop her from doing so, and he even gives her this delusional speech.
With all due respect, I don't think there is such a thing as a bad kid. And I can reach him. I know what's deaf, what's whack, what's jam, what's straight up booty. How long have you been teaching here?
But since the principal is very much aware of the type of students she has in this school, she promptly gets them together about trying to correct her in her school and goes on about her way. This is where we meet Mr. Clark's soon-to-be love interest, Victoria, the school's admin. Victoria shows him to his classroom. This classroom looks horrible, but Mr. Clark is so optimistic. He looks over the thin walls, rodents, and electrical problems. He just wants to teach. Pola Tink Tink. We fast forward to the assembly where Principal Doyle announces that the assistant principal is missing, and also introduces Mr. Clark to the entire student body.
It's his first day. Give him at least a week before you do something terrible to him.
Mr. Clark excitedly introduces himself to all the students. He was still trying to recite that same old, "I believe that children are our future" speech that the students do not care to hear. We go to Mr. Clark teaching his first class of the day, and of course, they are not paying attention. He decides to have the students stand up and introduce themselves. Just as he calls on Natalie, she walks into the class. He tells her to tell the class something personal about herself, and she takes it way too far.
Perhaps you could tell us something about yourself.
Well, for the last week I've had a yeast infection. That's extremely...
Not that personal.
And if that wasn't bad enough, she tells Mr. Clark that she writes poetry, and he insists on hearing it. Honestly, she could have kept that too.
I am but a rancid carcass on the highway. Roadkill for the maggots.
Mr. Clark meets some of the other students, starting with Anthony.
Oh.
Anthony had a poem for Mr. Clark too.
And I'm up on my shiznit, cause I love it when I'm just laid back with my bitch. Whichever one of them hoes I'm with. Call it love can be a wonderful thing.
We go on to Mrs. Julie. This girl is a married teenager with a growing family, and she's using school as free daycare. Nasty work. Mr. Clark then called on Griff and asked him where he saw himself in 5 years.
Living in your house, Holmes, with your crack ass buried under the front porch.
Even after hearing all of this and having his desk set on fire, he really thinks he's making a difference. Yeah. Mr. Clark asked Victoria for a ride home. She agreed to take him only if he agreed to help her chaperone the Welcome Back School dance. We fast forward to the school dance where, for some reason, Mr. Clark has walked up to the DJ and requested he play one of his wholesome, pristine records.
Like a rhinestone cowboy.
You got any more of this funky fresh shit lying around the crib?
We go to Griff and Natalie talking. Griff compliments Natalie on the poem she recited in class that day and asks her to dance. Tell me why they had a whole inappropriate routine. This almost counted as a knocking boots moment. The way we would have got kicked out of this school dance behind moves like this? Listen. Anyway, Paco pulls up to the dance to start a little trouble. And these chaperones are doing a piss poor job. They are not paying attention at all. Somehow, Mr. Clark has gained enough respect in a whole day for Anthony and his crew to come to him and ask him what they should do about Paco. As always, he tries to tell them not to be violent, to find a better way to communicate, but they don't quite get it. Mr. Clark tells them to follow him like he has a plan or something.
Say, nice leather jacket. Men's Warehouse?
Shut up, Teach.
Paco swiftly hemmed Mr. Clark up, and Griff walked up to defend him and the other students. Paco was upset at Natalie for linking up with Griff because, in his mind, she was his girl. He dared Griff to do a chickie run, and being that Mr. Clark is not hip to their lingo, he agrees that this is a better option. No, it was not. Paco steals wheels from a Domino's delivery guy, and Griff drives his own car, or what we thought was his own car. Maybe he should have done what Paco did, but Natalie starts the race.
Ready? Set. Go!
Mr. Clark borrows Victoria's car to try and stop Paco and Griff. Tell me why Griff was in Mr. Clark's car. You know, the one they stole in 2.3 seconds off the lot. He's unable to stop them before they both hop out and leave him to figure out how to escape from the car before it was too late. It didn't take long before this news got to the principal, and she scolded Mr. Clark for it. Not that he listened, because he was too preoccupied with removing this string from her skirt and somehow made it worse. Now, after the Chicky Run situation, Mr. Clark is respected around the school, and Paco isn't cool with that. He's already plotting. Mr. Clark goes into class thinking his students will be on the same ish as the day before, but they weren't. They showed him a little bit of mercy, but they still didn't want to participate in class. We fast forward to career day at school, and again, Paco is walking around the school like he actually goes there. He sees Griff and starts talking mess per usual.
I see you got a bright future ahead of you.
Paco tries to convince Griff to work with him so he can get the money he needs for his family. Griff is unsure about it and doesn't give Paco a definite answer. Paco still wasn't done cruising around the school. He takes his silly ass inside, finds Victoria, and tries to assault her. And Mr. Clark does what he does best. He inserted himself in a situation thinking he was helping, but he really only made things worse for Victoria. Victoria took more licks than Paco, child, but Mr. Clark was finally able to get Paco up out of there and save Victoria from further abuse from him.
It's okay, it's me.
I know!
After this eventful day, Mr. Clark takes Victoria home to make sure she's okay and do other stuff with her. Mr. Clark insists that the situation with Paco would not drive him away and that he was even more dedicated to teaching and convincing the kids that they could have better futures. Victoria warns him about raising the kids' expectations, only for them to fail in the end. Of course, Mr. Clark didn't listen. He was too focused on, well...
Yeah.
After leaving Victoria's, Mr. Clark sees Griff entering a strip club. Now, before your thoughts go left, his family lived in an apartment upstairs. How convenient. Anyway, Mr. Clark tries to convince Griff to work with him so that they can turn the school around. Griff isn't with it initially, but Mr. Clark asks him if he has dreams, and Griff admits that he wants to go to college. Mr. Clark promises him that he can get him into college and get him out of the hood.
You don't have to live in a community. Some sleazy bar and some over-the-hill stripper expose herself for a few measly dollars in her G-string.
With Griff on board, Mr. Clark is now on a mission to save these hopeless students.
Now, this is your textbook for the semester. They open like this.
And then we get a montage of the students learning, working together to clean the school in their neighborhood, and for some odd reason, the principal wasn't happy. It's always the damn principals. Every single time. The students even released the assistant principal that was missing. The day comes for the students to take the exam. Everybody feels prepared and confident, except for Anthony. They should have pulled Anthony to the side and worked with him. He didn't even know the test was backwards, child. Later on, Griff and Natalie spend some time together. Tell me why Mr. Clark has managed to turn the local strip club to an erotic theater of sorts.
Who would have thought the old man to have so much blood?
Who would have thought the old man to have so much blood in him?
Meanwhile, Paco and his boys switched the test overnight, and the next day, the students received the devastating news that they all failed. The principal swiftly fires Mr. Clark, and slowly but surely, all the students lose hope and leave class. Poor Mr. Clark was in his feelings.
You can come back. Look at me. I'm living proof.
A couple of days later, news gets around that Paco and his boys had something to do with the failing test scores.
They switched the test. That's why everybody flunked. Well, you know, you guys, I probably didn't need no help.
The students go off to find Mr. Clark, who's been missing ever since he got fired. They find him somewhere in Chinatown drinking his life away. The students convince him to come with them to go save Griff from joining Paco's gang. Mr. Clark still thinks all he has to do is go in and get Griff, say a few motivational speeches, and everything will be back to how it was. Absolutely not.
The Clark, you can't just go in there and be like, okay, Griff, we're going home. Else you gonna be going home in a box.
So the plan was for Mr. Clark to get the cash from DeMarco and go to the back of the restaurant and save Griff. They get to the restaurant, and Mr. Clark and Victoria decide to work together to get the cash. Meanwhile, Griff is in the back with Paco and his crew. He makes a split decision to pull out of the deal, and of course, Paco and his boys weren't going for it. Mr. Clark and Victoria go into the restaurant's laundry and disguise themselves as waiters. Mind you, they didn't get these disguises out of the dryer. No. They got them straight out the washer. They were both dripping wet, looking crazy. But as they are taking DeMarco's order, they grab the suitcase just in time for the other restaurant workers to distract him by singing happy birthday to him. They run off to change into another disguise. They check the suitcase and find money and a gun. Mr. Clark places the gun in this random baking dish, which a random chef comes behind him and places that same dish in the oven. As they make their way to the back of the restaurant, they are stopped by this guy, and Mr. Clark fumbles through this exchange.
I'm here to see Mr. A.
And who the hell are you?
I'm Mr. B. Mr. D couldn't make it. He's out with Mr. C.
Yeah, that was super believable. They finally make it to where Paco and Griff are. Paco and Griff are both in shock. Mr. Clark and Victoria try to keep the gag going and convince Paco and his guys that they are low-life scum. His words, not mine, like them. It was finally time for the head honcho, Mr. A, to come out and introduce themselves and tell me why Mr. A is actually Principal Doyle. Safe to say they were both shocked, but they still tried their best to keep this charade going. Mr. A still doubts that Mr. Clark and Victoria are stepping into the bad side, so she starts asking questions, and of course, Mr. Clark doesn't have any of the right answers. This causes Mr. A to get creative and ask that Mr. Clark take drugs since he claims to be a dealer. Victoria gets the guy's attention long enough for Mr. Clark to grab this random ball so that he can shoot the drugs in it rather than in his arm. Now, how they didn't see this bright blue ball, I don't know, but he acts like he's oh so high, and this was perfect timing because that gun they placed in the oven moments before fires off, and Mr. Clark was able to get rid of the ball, or at least try to. As Mr. A and Paco leave the room to count the money in the briefcase, Mr. Clark and Victoria talk to Griff. They tell him about how Paco switched the test and that the police are on their way. Before they could escape, DeMarco comes in and recognizes Mr. Clark and Victoria from earlier. Soon after, Mrs. A and Paco walk back out and DeMarco lets them know he was the real dealer. Mr. A tells Paco and his boys to get rid of all of them, but before they could, Anthony came through like he said he would.
Come on, G's, they down this way.
You guys.
In the house.
And we get the most comical, unrealistic fight ever. Their fight ends up back in the restaurant where the rest of the students come in to help Mr. Clark. All the students confront Mr. A, aka Principal Doyle. They know that she was behind the switch test, so they all band together to prove all they've learned.
The Gadsden Purchase form parts of what two states? Arizona, New Mexico. The capital of Ecuador.
For me.
Who was responsible for the first moonwalk?
Michael Jackson.
They are interrupted by the police who promptly hem Principal Doyle, Paco, and the crew, and everything is all good in the hood. We fast forward to all the kids, well, only the ones that were in Mr. Clark's class, graduating high school, and that's pretty much the end of the movie. And here are my final thoughts. The last scene of this movie brought up an interesting point that I've noticed in films such as Dangerous Minds, Freedom Riders, and others, is that most of the time, the teachers manage to get through to this specific set of students, and then they follow them to wherever they go. We don't see them duplicate what they've done with other students or new students, and then they always make it seem like this one class determined their entire future, when they have to somehow not only pass this one class, but others. And if their other teachers are not getting the same output from them, then of course they are still not going to progress. Not unless they put in the same work in all their other classes as they do in this one specific class that we see. I just wanted to note that because seeing only the few students that were in Mr. Clark's class graduate was so funny to me. I hadn't seen this movie in years, and it reminded me how much fun watching spoof movies can be. There was so much going on in the background of certain scenes. If you watch this movie and you only pay attention to what happens in the background, the little stuff they add in, it's freaking hilarious. Like the missing teacher and how the students set him free, but after Mr. Clark got fired, they snatched his ass right back up. Or the students spiking the punch at the school dance, how the private school only accepted white students. Even the people running to catch and hop on the bus since the bus refused to stop in their neighborhood. So funny. I also loved how they had Mr. Clark recite the same old delusional speeches about saving the kids and getting them to believe in themselves and their futures. Like it's really that simple. It sounds cute, but how are you actually gonna do it? What's the action plan? And why hasn't it been done before you? Are we not gonna talk about what these students have to face outside of the school? How there can be limited access to resources, funds, and support? Child. But never mind all that. Just believe in yourself. Okay, anyway, that's it for this review. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. For my next recap, all I'm going to say is 1992, this was an independent film about a fun, smart Brooklyn girl who thought she knew it all until life and a cute boy with a Jeep showed her that she didn't. See you next time, you guys. Bye.